Okay. All right. So I'm gonna preface here, and I didn't really write out a script, so like I would like this to be more discussion type sort of Pubspeak, more along the lines of what Jake did. So I will be asking you questions eventually, and you will be talking, and everything's gonna go good. So I have a set of two sets of factoids actually for you. And the first, I'm just going to tell you about it, and hopefully there will be a trend that you can observe. So, a couple of centuries back, this guy named Marco Polo goes to Asia. And he sees a lot of cool stuff, and he comes back to Europe. And he tells everybody about this cool stuff, and he maybe like exaggerates a little bit. And so he writes this book, and it gets published. You know, everything goes good for this guy, I think. And so, as early as I think pre-Renaissance times, the European tradition establishes a sort of economic and cultural fascination with East Asia. You know, spices and silk and empire and pretty women who don't look like your pretty women. And so, you know, so fast forward like 200 years maybe more than that, I don't know. But to like the last quarter of the 19th century, and this Italian guy named Puccini writes an opera called Madame Butterfly. And this is an opera about a Caucasian general who goes to Japan and romances a very stereotypically beautiful Japanese woman. And she's docile, and she's lovely, and she's really awkwardly pale for her race. But anyway, then he leaves her, and she has this really tragic fate that she has to deal with. So anyway, Madame Butterfly is rewritten as Miss Saigon, which is like a theater version set in the Vietnam War with an American soldier and a Vietnamese woman. That gets pretty famous, you know, along the same century. For most part of the same 20th century, in Hollywood and in theater, what's called yellowface is used, which is a technique where white men and white women expend a lot of effort and a lot of cosmetics to look like Asian men and Asian women, you know, like eyes and stuff. So anyway, fast forward maybe like 30 years, all right. And so David Bowie releases a song called China Girl. I don't know if you've ever seen the video, but it looks something like this. Okay. By the way, sorry I didn't show you pictures of the opera, but this is the original Madame Butterfly, isn't it? Right?
Over here. Can you see it?
Sorry, I can't make it any bigger. I'm sorry. And then this is Miss Saigon, which is equally romantic. And this is Yellowface, which is only slightly less romantic. Okay, so anyway, sorry. So this is a trend, and I hope you're observing the trend, hopefully, that extends even to Arthur Golden, who writes Memoirs of a Geisha, and I count that as sort of relatively recent times. Memoirs of a Geisha has many of the same themes of exoticism and this lingering fascination with the Far East, which I like to call the myth of the Orient. Because ever since this guy named Marco Polo, the Western fascination with the Far East has taken kind of a troubling character in that it takes its fascination and its need for exoticism and newness and just foreignness, and it builds sort of a conglomerate image of the East where, I mean, who knows what China and Japan and Korea and all that stuff are. It's just the Orient, you know, and it's nice and it's cool and we get stuff from it. So the thing about the myth of the Orient is that now, you know, in the 21st century, we tend to think of it as sort of a passing structure, like it belongs to a bygone time, you know, a time when we weren't as educated, weren't as globalized, we didn't know about stuff that we probably should have known about. And so it's a Western tradition that we think is distorted and has fallen out of favor. So that ends factoid set number 1. And factoid set number 2 is fast forwarded a little bit to, I think, like starting in like 2003. So anyway, Gwen Stefani, which you may or may not know, went through this phase in her life where she released a number of albums and a fashion line and perfumes where she had these 4 Asian women as her backup dancers under this temporary label of Harajuku girls. Harajuku referring to a district in Tokyo, Japan, known for its distinctive style. And you know, for a period in her time, these 4 backup dancers, if you will, accompanied her basically everywhere she went, all her public events, all her videos, dressed in elaborate coordinating costume. And they were distinctive because of their makeup. You know, those Asian almond-shaped eyes were accentuated, and that small red pout of the perfect geisha was also accentuated. And so, anyway, fast forward a couple more years, and Nicki Minaj picks up where she left off with this garb. I hope you can see this, it's worth seeing. Anyway, Nicki Minaj does this in some of her music videos, notably I think one called like Love Me or something. No Love. Thank you. I needed that. Alright, so Nicki Minaj is doing her thing, and not to be outdone, Rihanna recently decides that she also needs to be doing this thing. Alright, I think this is a couple months ago that Rihanna tweeted this prior to the release of her collaboration with Coldplay in their new music video, Princess of China. And this picture was accompanied by the caption, Gangsta Goth Geisha. Anyway. So I thought that to drive home Rihanna's point, we could watch their music video. I mean, everybody likes that, right? Yeah, I'm gonna play Coldplay, so I hope everybody's okay with that. This one? Sorry. So there's like 3 minutes or something. If you just save them, you know, you'll fast forward to the highlights. Oh, and this was released, I think, just before I came to class, actually. I really like this. It's so nice.
Oh, yeah. There aren't any lyrics. Awesome non-skip chanting. That's not annoying.
There we go.
Bye, everybody.
So disturbing.
At the risk of reaffirming Johnny's point a little bit too much, I think that was pretty classy eye. So, alright, so I think what actually inspired me to do this Pubspeak is this video. I don't know how many of the details you were able to catch from that distance, but the opening sequence with like the trailer and like that sort of like title sequence, if you know what I mean, is very, very reminiscent of like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, House of Flying Daggers, that sort of thing, 80s sitcom. Anyway, so there's that issue. Rihanna's dress, both in the beginning and the very, very end part of the video, is typically, has been said to look more Japanese than Chinese. There were ninjas, there were dragon lady nails. There's also like the imagery of the Thousand Goddess, which is, it is used historically in China and Japan, but it originates in India. There's also been issues raised with like the tattoo markings on the drummers that you saw when Chris Martin walked into that palace thing. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that this Orientalist imagery, or the myth of the Orient that we tend to attribute to the past, seems not so of the past. And if you've seen the examples that I've given, I feel like it continues to be manifested, if you will, this idea of a one exotic Asia, basically. And it's being applied in our times, in our society, to a sort of fetishization that objectifies and sexualizes and markets women as one of many things. Because, well, for example, this Coldplay video was released, like I said, right before I came to task. Doing some reliably trolling on the internet, I found that most of the reviews towards the actual music, which does not seem to correlate strictly to the video, has been neutral to positive, and critiques of the actual video seem to be limited solely to websites and blogs and things that were conspicuously of ethnic minorities, and it has not received a lot of, I guess, mainstream publicity in some of these issues. So that is, I guess, this really troubled me, because I like to think that this idea of the Orient is sort of this wee mistake of the past that we've gotten over. But this makes me think that, like this video really shocked me, the reaction to it really shocked me when it came out, and it made me think that maybe I'm being actually a little bit more optimistic about how far we've come. Alright, so I guess in reaction, the renowned AngryGoComics.tumblr.com has to say, "Wow, fuck off, Dillhole. Can't you see I'm trying to eat a burger?" I really like her, but like, I really like her.
What was the relation?
Sorry, can you just describe what the girl, what the comic kind of looks like?
Oh, I'm sorry. She's actually, this is tangentially related because this comic is actually about how like people who are attracted to Asian women, but because they objectify Asian women. So yeah, there's like, she looks all manga girl and she looks really pretty and she says, "Oh, kawaii white boy, come teach me about my own culture." Anyway, so I'm sorry for that detour, but I guess what I want to say with this is that while I really like this girl, that's not really the tone that I want to take here, because I think that this relates to the fact that in our culture, in our times, anybody who knows what politically correct is wants to be politically correct. That's like a desirable virtue now, right? Like it says that it's a mark of being educated, being open-minded, and having a relatively I know you're doing it for satire. Anyway.
I don't know how.
But anyway, so, but I think along with that comes a lot of pressure and confusion about what is that line that we draw between cultural appropriation, which is what I would say, like this video here, I would say that's pretty cultural appropriation. But what is the difference between that and cultural appreciation? Like, are those lines, who draws those lines, I guess, and where are they exactly, and how does that allow us to act with openness and without shame, without pressure? Because even today, I feel like when people ask me, so what are you? Like, are you Chinese, are you Korean, are you Japanese? There's that, it's awkward for them, and it's kind of awkward for me, but it's awkward for me because I know that it's awkward for them. Because they don't want to offend me, they don't want to come off as ignorant, but how do you ask that question, What does it mean to be sensitive to a cultural minority, and what does it mean to sort of to appropriate that culture and use it for your own use in an ethically incorrect way? Alright, so I guess what I would like, I'm going to ask you guys some questions that we can talk over, but I guess what I want to ask is like, how can we establish a sort of an ethically correct and culturally sensitive guideline for what is appropriation and what is appreciation? Alright, so for example, Halloween costumes. Alright, some typical tropes in Halloween costumes. We've got geisha, we've got Indian princess, referring to Native Americans. We have the Arabian belly dancer and the ninja and the Egyptian queen. And I find these costumes to be reductionist and commercialized and sexualized sometimes, but not necessarily with malicious intent. A lot of it is marketed towards like very young kids who you would not think are trying to bash your culture. So I guess like what are you guys' thoughts on that? Like, do you think that is an incorrect practice? Like, whose fault is it if it is? Angie?
I guess it's really interesting because I think last year at my school for Halloween, there was a group in our school who posted a poster that said, "This is my culture, not a costume." And I think that element of you don't dress up as a wasp, right? Like a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you don't dress up as
I do every day.
but you don't do it, like that's my Halloween costume kind of thing. So like I guess like why I took that like as something that was a certain that I didn't think about that wasn't the forefront of my mind, and secondly, and that I thought that was a very valid point, right? Like so if it's not appropriate to dress up as a dominant culture, why is it any more appropriate to dress up like dressing up? I think diminishes the cultural value of the clothing because it's not a form of dress up, it's their culture, and so I think that is a valid point.
I have to disagree with what Angie said, and here's why. I feel that when people are going around dressing up as various cultures here, I'm going to say, I'm dressing up like someone from China or rather, you gave like a specific list of people, far-fetched or not, that they're dressing up as like a belly dancer or a king or queen or something like that. And at the same time, you do see people who are dressing up as the same types of, personas from Western cultures, from European cultures. Just as much as you'd see an Egyptian pharaoh, you'd also see a French king or some sort of goddess, a crown on his head, and the very typical Western monarchical regalia. And so I don't see why, no one from France says, well, look, there's someone who's dressed up like Louis XIV. That's offensive. And so to me, it's almost like there are people who are dressed up as white people. It's just they aren't walking around in blue jeans and a t-shirt. It's not everyday garb.
It's usually serious colors.
Again, not every day. So I feel that it is, not necessarily offensive. If someone just says, I'm going to dress up like someone from South Korea and does something silly, that's different.
Yeah, no, I definitely get your point because I feel like there's a line you have to draw where you cannot just be too sensitively offended by everything. But I would ask, like, in that example, do you think the person dressing up as Louis XIV has a more historically or contextually accurate costume, for example, than the person dressing up as the European belly dancer? Sorry, go ahead.
I have no idea how a 5-year-old would view King Louis XIV.
Right. Okay.
If someone who's like, I'm a mix of all these ethnicities, but taking someone dressed up as like St. Patrick for the Irish, or I don't know who they dress up from Italy, campus. I don't know. We don't have that many Chinese people, which is such a shame. But I mean, I don't get it. I wouldn't get offended by these things, and so that's just my personal.
Italian pizza man.
Italian, yeah. If the Domino's pizza guy for Italy, I don't really know.
Or a mafia guy or something.
Yeah, even better.
Wow, you guys are really great. Yeah, sure. Okay,
Wow.
I guess I would just in response, just quick response to Michael, what you said, I think the difference is that what's out there about whatever Eastern culture is, whether Indian or Asian, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, the difference is that education is out there. Actually, there's not so much awareness of what the background is, whereas I feel like there's more awareness generally of Western culture in general. So I think that's what I definitely agree that it's people dress up in Western clothes as well, but I feel like there's not as much awareness, and I think the awareness is what makes the difference. But going back to Cathy, your original question, which is what I was my hand up for, is I think it goes kind of back to what we were talking about, like when we were talking about ethics and stuff. Like, does not doing bad things make you a good person? And it doesn't make you a bad person, but it doesn't really make you a good person. I kind of say no, it doesn't. Sometimes you do have to take steps, and you do have to educate yourself and be aware. I guess.
Yeah, I guess like before we move on, I just want to put a tiny qualifier that I think that
like this Pubspeak, I know we began with a very like Western and Eastern distinction, but also I want to point out that yes, in Asia you see a lot of people who take like imagery of like the Eiffel Tower, for example, and they stick it on like clothes or whatever, and market it with like this romanticized view of the West. So that also happens, it's cultural appropriation is cultural appropriation. Okay, Shri, I mean, sorry, not Shri, other stuff.
Well, obviously, I also kind of to tap on to Shree's point in regards to Michael's point, that there's also a kind of certain awareness that you have about yourself. Like, for example, if you're dressed up as, and really any kind of foreign, if you take on that kind of costume, there's a kind of self-satisfaction and the awareness that you're kind of attempting to take part in this culture that's not your own. And I feel like the intent behind that is just as important as the kind of educational background that you might or might not have, if that makes sense. Like the intent of wearing, for example, a belly dancer costume is the fact that it comes from this place that's not your own. Therefore, that's where the kind of costume aspect comes from. It's that foreignness that you're kind of taking advantage of, which is not necessarily actual point.
Like you said, it was a two-way street in terms of how people interpret each other. So whenever I go to India, and I say I'm from Texas, and the first thing that comes to mind is cowboy culture. So like people watch all these movies from like the 70s and stuff, and they still imagine that I just on a horse and things like that. So like it's definitely too early.
Yeah. And actually, I think that's kind of interesting in relation to what Lisa just said, because I feel like a costume is it says a lot implicitly, and so your intent and what's conveyed, there's a distance there. Like, for example, what is the difference between a kid who dresses up in a sort of like commercialized like belly dancer costume, for example, and somebody who legitimately goes to India, like buys a sari and tries it on? What's the difference there? I think it's touchy. Katie.
I guess, like, I can't speak for other countries, but I think definitely the context of, like, here in the United States, like, there is a certain element of, I'm trying to figure out how to, like, to me, like, wearing, like, a costume of, like, Louis XIV or whatever is not quite so subversive, because there's, like, for a minority or whatever, there's an additional sort of, like, a layer of organization that goes on. Like, there's no threat to like the white person. Whereas like conversely, I feel like there's an element of that if like a white person like walks around with blackface or wears like a Asian costume.
Do you think that maybe goes back to what she said about education, like or awareness, that like because most people dressing or most people in this country will be aware of like the historically accurate version of Louis XIV, but not necessarily like the realities of like a geisha in Japan.
Right, and just the specificity of it, like Louis the 14th, one white man versus like the belly dancer in general.
I give a rebuttal just that people would bring it up my point. I just used to be Louis the 14th as an example. Don't get trusted as like generally speaking as a specific person, just like kind of maybe generic, insert generic French name or something. Also, when you're 5 years old and you're doing something, not all cultures China were essentially the same in nature and correctness as they were of France and of Russia. And so I don't feel that there's like, even we're the United States, and even within that, there are stereotypes from other states. And so I don't feel that when you're at a young age, you have a familiarity with almost anywhere. And it sounds sort of sad, but I mean, there is that innocence and it is true that we don't really grasp the world outside of our town, really.
Well, why would we isolate just young age when it's definitely
I mean, I don't know how many 15-year-olds walk around just this way. And if they are, I think that's really silly, and so I would say that's different. But okay, I have not seen that, but I guess I live in a very sheltered area.
I'm just gonna say there's more questions, so if you guys want to continue with this one, I'm totally okay with that, or do you want me to also? Julia.
So Sri pointed out that there's less of a cultural awareness for sort of ethnic minorities than for basically lost culture. But on the other hand, our schools are, it just doesn't seem like that should be particularly surprising. This is not to say that it should be like this, but because we are a country whose predominant ideological influences and historical influences come from like Western Europe, and then sort of North America, it sort of follows that we're going to be more aware of those from at least history class than those other cultures. I agree we should probably spend more time in school systems or some other form of education learning about these other cultures, but it just seems unrealistic to expect that we would spend as much time on, I don't know, like Indian history as American history. I doubt that's what anybody's proposing, but there's always going to be some element of disparity there. And I wonder at what point is it okay for someone to plead ignorance and rather than not embrace a cultural stereotype, but say, for instance, I would do this where I ask about Chinese culture. I would say, I just don't know, and I'm not going to try. I'm going to try not to stereotype it. I just don't know. What balance between those two is acceptable?
I think that, I'm not sure, but I think your point when you get into the idea of cultural ownership, like how much is in the public domain being freely or artistically, if you will, and how much is sort of a proprietary thing of that particular culture group. But we can get onto that in the follow-up questions. So, Christine.
Yeah, it's kind of like a rebuttal to Michael's point.
Not very confident.
Okay, so like there are 20-year-olds in Georgia walking around in sexy squaw costumes, and 38% of Native American women are raped, and I think the sexualization of Native American women definitely contributes to that. How many white women are raped because they're white? I'm not saying that like rape of white women is like any less like but really, but how many white women are raped because they're white? And Amnesty International actually kind of made them. You can go to their website and they do talk about the rape of Native American and Alaska Native women, and the thing is that for women of other races, they're like most of the rape is like date rape, but for women of Native American descent, their rape is mostly straight rape. So that kind of means that there are people coming to the Native American tribal areas to specifically target those women. And I'm pretty sure that like legal, like there are some like legal repercussions to that, but the thing is that how do you like respond to that? Like to what point are you like sexualizing these cultures?
I just want
Is there like a difference between like wearing like some French costume and like wearing a sexy squaw costume? Like how do you draw a line there?
I just want to ask to do with the statistic. Sort of across different cultures, there are going to be different like sort of dating systems, right? So I just wonder, you might not know this, but how would they analyze what was date rape in different cultures when there are different conceptions of what like a date is, or maybe they use a different. I'm sure they use a more encompassing definition of that, but I mean I'm not familiar with this.
This
So-
is inside of the United States.
Inside the U.S.
Are you referring to like?
Yeah, I'm just not sure what you mean by these terms.
Are you referring to like people of the same minority, committing and being victims of the date rape, or are you referring to like predominantly like WASP.
Huh?
Would you say
I'm
that
sorry,
white
I'm really-
women?
Saying white people victimizing Native Americans.
I mean, I mean
State
to
of
ask,
Georgia.
when
That
you
is
say,
Georgia.
when you say date rape, do you basically mean rape by someone you are
Yes.
familiar with?
No.
Right, I mean, okay, that seems like more, yeah, it's an odd term. Yeah.
Do you want me to respond to that?
How do you guys feel about moving on to the next question?
Yeah. So I just wanted to like tap on another point to Christine's point, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in terms of like, there are like certain ceremonial clothing that Native Americans, and I'm sure it's the same in the U.S. but in Canada, like they use that, and when you use it as a Halloween costume, I think that.
Sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry. And this is just like a comment, I guess, kind of like not completely relevant, but I just wanted to throw it out there. I was actually just surprised to use the Sherlock episode of the Flying Pictures.
Yeah.
That really annoyed me.
I just thought that was a bad episode in general.
Yeah, but the whole like docile, like Asian girl, and like all the stereotypes. Yeah. So,
Alright, I'm going to ask the next question, and it is going to be again about a cultural minority, but I want to stress again that I love the points that you guys are making, but I do want to stress again that this is like, I know that within the context of the United States, that the white, Protestant, that's the predominant culture, and so it's sort of impossible to talk about it on the flip side in this context, but that, like, if you moved it to Asia, like what Karan said, people do also, like, when you're in a place where white Anglican Americans are not the predominant race, then they are also objectified. So, yeah, you guys have to keep that in mind, please. But anyway, so I think it was last year that Urban Outfitters received the latest in like a string of I guess like people who sued them. What is that word? When people sue?
Class action.
Lawsuits. Thank you.
It's a class action lawsuit, yeah.
I think so, but yeah, over their line of Navajo print wear, which included the Navajo print fabric wrapped flask and the peace treaty feather necklace, and the staring at Sarah's skull native headdress t-shirt and the Navajo hipster panty. So. Anyway, so I guess what I want to ask here is, and we might have touched on this already, but what do you think is the line between what's the possession, the specific possession of a culture, of a cultural group, like as in like motifs and patterns and I guess objects and rituals and things like that. What is the difference between that and artistic license, or what is in the public domain to be manipulated for artistic purposes? Does that make sense?
In the Navajo lawsuit, I think the point of contention that it used the word like Navajo. But I definitely think that like at a certain point, their like artistic license, that's not a thing. Like you should probably just not like make Native American headdresses, considering like the cultural background, I guess, and the fact that they're still like important and they have historical and cultural importance beyond like hipster white girls like parading it around. I think that's cool.
Do you think there should be? This is an issue that like bothers me personally greatly, but I also think that. Do you think that there's an issue with putting the arbitration of that one completely in the hands of the cultural group that's being disempowered, I guess? Because then, like somebody who really just doesn't know, how do they say? How do they find out, if you will, if it's the cultural group that can just say at any point, well, that's our property, like how do you go about producing art or conducting business or whatever it is you're doing? What guidelines do you follow in that case? Sorry, do you want to go?
I was gonna say, no one's like asked, like, hey, is this like crossing a line?
Rebecca?
Who do you ask?
So coming from a very white, non-ethnic backgrounds, I think there is sort of in any culture that's not your own and that you're not always exposed to, there is this sort of fascination, and you don't know as much about it as you do about normal, everyday, whatever you see normally. And so then anything you don't know, you are going to tend to romanticize a little bit. Maybe that's just me and that's how I function, but I I sort of feel like that's part of human nature. We tend to exaggerate and fantasize about what we don't know. And so then when you do get all these things like designer things coming out with these products about things that you don't know a lot about but you're interested in, and not in, you know, a malicious way, but just you're interested and you don't know that much about it. You know, I don't know exactly what point I'm trying to make here. But there are a lot of people who want to buy that stuff and be able to have it, not out of any sort of malicious intent or any, you know, reason to make fun of it, but just because they're interested in it. And it would probably be better if they could go, you know, go to India or go to China or go to a Native American reservation and actually see it for themselves and get it for themselves and, you know the context of it. But that's not a realistic option for most people. So I just wanted to throw that point out there.
I understand what you're saying about how like that does, like when people don't know, they tend to like go with that, but at the same time I still think that objectifies certain cultures in a way that it really shouldn't be, because these cultures are kind of sensitive in that area. Like for instance, my high school, our mascot used to be the Indians in 2002 when a lawsuit was filed, so now we're the Falcons. Because of that, like it portrays that image that there's a stereotype that goes along with it. So I think in that respect that there is like a certain line where, okay, we get that like it's something cool or something that's fascinating that we don't know about, but at the same time, we should just like, I think that as a culture, we should try and be more like aware of others in the future. Like, I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. I think it's interesting. So,
I think that the problem here is not with like romanticizing other cultures so much as commodifying them. I mean, especially when you're talking about like Urban Outfitters, clearly the people who designed that weren't like, oh, I'm so fascinated by Native Americans. I'm going to make them into underwear. It's very clearly, I mean, so the fault doesn't lie so much in like the hipster chicks who wear them to concerts, or like the people who buy them so much as the people who turn them into a product in the first place.
Alright, question I wanted to ask earlier before I get into my real question. Am I the only, who else here has never heard of the WASP abbreviation?
actually,
Really?
I have never heard of it. Okay, real question here. Okay, real comment, I should say. Personally, one of the most horrifying experiences I've ever seen in cultural objectification and commodification was at this my national video competition this last year, held in Dallas, 45 minutes from my own home. The school that put it on is one of the richest schools in Texas, Highland Park. They live in a very, very high-class, small, exclusive neighborhood. And in the process of putting it on, you could buy really, really horrible styrofoam cowboy hats, and pretty much every single prompt for a video you had to create had some sort of overly stereotyped Texan theme. For example, for the regularly regarded as extremely competitive and indicative of talent movie competition, the title was The Magic Lasso and handed you a piece of string. I mean, that's like, it's not a lasso, and it's basically just grandly oversimplifying everything that is Texas to prove a point and to sell a novelty. And, I mean, I actually had some discussions with kids from other parts of the state about how much our culture was, our fake culture that didn't even exist is being sold. So I think one of the big points is whenever you cross the line and you're no longer even selling a true product, that's horrible. And when your own people, if you will, I don't like Highland Park personally, are the people doing it, that's all the more horrible. So that's my 2 bits on there. So, yeah.
Okay. So I'm not trying to like open a can of worms because I don't think this. But what if like, and I don't like. What if like there is a certain amount of like glorification and like making culturally objectifying products or art or something. Like what if the person that made like the Navajo underwear or whatever, I make underwear, I think this is a really cool like, at what point is it like art that you like, you know, you, like this is my art and this is what I do with my life and I want to show something that I really like aesthetically, like to a bunch of people. But at what point does it like cross that line between like art and like your education? Why is it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly like, you know, cultural appreciation. You know, like what if you're genuinely trying to expand or increase exposure to this culture, but you're probably not doing it correctly. Like, it's really
I guess just kind of a quick response to Sheldon's statement that like you're selling a fake version of something, like a really fake oversimplified version of something that's real. So like, but in my mind, it's not okay to like, so if we're using like Native American headdresses was on that list, and like you're selling an actual genuine like Native American headdress, like that doesn't make it any better just because it isn't fake. Like that would still really bother me because that's a cultural artifact and that's something that's supposed to be very sacred, and it's still. But I don't like this at all. Like it makes me very, very uncomfortable to even think.
You're removing the genuine nature of all those Native American things. I mean, there's a certain aspect of not necessarily, but yes, physical truth, but like symbolic truth.
Yeah, well, even just the selling of it at all is just not okay with me.
So, I think, I guess going back to one of the things, I can't really articulate this, but I think there is a way to positively appreciate culture, right? Because like, and maybe this might be because like I'm not familiar with how the Irish are portrayed outside of America. So I think suspect that might be. But like I don't know any Irish people who are offended by like the fighting Irish. Like that's the kind of thing. There's a certain amount of pride. Like yeah, like. Yeah.
Do you think that's entirely dependent on the reaction of the different countries?
Yeah, I mean that's like an interesting thing, right? Like, you couldn't predict beforehand there would be like a positive response to that, and you couldn't know like if you are appreciating or appropriating. But I mean, and I'm not sure. Like Katie said, that the first time was like you could always ask me, like who do you ask? Like as a, you know, so.
I think in the case of like the Navajo Hipster panties, it was like they're established like nations within the United States.
Yeah, I mean that's.
But yeah, I know that it doesn't always apply. Just. No.
I was going to say, I think offensiveness is a reflective thing, and it's not offensive if nobody gets offended. I'm not saying it's people's choice whether or not to be offended at somebody, you know, a modification or objectification of their culture. But at the same time, like no one's going to get offended if I make like Holocaust jokes are completely inappropriate. Like going back to maybe what Johnny was talking about. But if I make jokes about like Jews being slaves in Egypt or something, or some other like long-ago thing, no one's gonna get hurt because of that. At least nobody that I know. So does it become less offensive if nobody gets hurt because of it? Like let's say that, you know, something like rape becomes a thing of the past, then rape jokes just aren't offensive any longer because they hurt nobody. So I'd say that it has a lot to do with the effects of it, and that sounds really terrible, and it makes it sound like it's the victim's fault. But at the same time, it's a matter of context. I don't think that like we're trying to draw lines around it. I think that's very difficult because just as time passes away from things, they become more and more okay to do stuff too. As long as nobody holds it like really closely. I wouldn't be offended if somebody took like a very like peripheral thing in my culture, but the closer you get to my identity, the more offended I get.
Do you think that, so if we're going to say that it's difficult and impossible to be predictive and correct all the time, do you think that if we leave arbitration completely to like the reaction of the party or who would potentially be getting hurt, so do you think that, I guess the question that I have would be that if somebody does get hurt, we don't necessarily stop that appropriation.
We don't, but I also think that a lot of times, I'm no fan of political correctness, but I think a lot of times people get hurt because that's sometimes a good thing for it to happen in order to get more awareness for your identity or in lots of ways. And that's a terrible thing to say. I think that's not how a lot of things work. But if you want to start a publicity outreach machine, no better way than to marshal your people and look what's happening to us, even if something might not be happening to you.
I guess just like we have one more topic if you want to do it. Okay. Do you guys want to continue or just move on?
Let's move to the next one.
Alright, so it's actually kind of related to what we're talking about, but like, going back to how it's not just white people versus racial minorities thing, but like, okay, so like the Eiffel Tower and the Colosseum and Mount Fuji and the Great Wall of China, it's like there's these landmarks and there's these like sort of symbols, if you will, of certain cultures that's pretty accepted, I think, everywhere. You know, like we stick the Eiffel Towers or something. I don't really think anybody's going to get offended that you're generalizing all of France with it. And so, where does that difference come in? And I think that we've talked about generally speaking, but what about you guys personally as people? Because I think that I'd like to think that we're all pretty racially sensitive people, or like culturally sensitive people, if you will. That we try to not offend people or try not to hurt people. And so in your everyday life, or how do you arbitrate what to do and what not to? You know, like where does the Eiffel Tower and like the Great Wall of China turn into like orange chicken and like a kind of offensive image or whatever, you know? Julian.
I just sort of wonder, isn't this sort of commodification like a direct byproduct of how capitalism works? I mean, how do we get around that? Like that. I mean, I don't like it, but it seems to be how the system works, and I wonder if that's going to build into this.
I'm just trying to clarify. Are you saying that to abstain from exploiting like a good opportunity to market because it might be offensive is sort of counter to how capitalism works?
Well, it would require a restriction on how capitalism works. I think capitalism, it seems, in my limited understanding of how economics works and how business works, basically, if there's an area that can be exploited legally, it will probably be exploited. And this is and the cultural appropriation thing is included. So do we need to put some sort of legislative restriction on this, or do we need to counteract it a different way?
Well, I think it's difficult to legislate because, like what Joseph said, it seems like we've come to the conclusion that it's very reaction-based.
Yeah.
That if somebody gets hurt, then, you know, ethically speaking, you should probably stop. But that's difficult to legislate. Like, that sort of reaction thing is difficult to legislate. And so I guess that's why I'm sort of asking you guys, because I think that we don't have that kind of legislation now. That's not how it works now. So how do you guys personally, as aware people, keep from being offensive, I guess, will?
When I hate to keep going back to this, but when I went to India, sorry, I thought that I wasn't. Basically, I thought I was the most callous, like, can't touch me sort of person with humor, with regards to humor, that ever lived. And it turns out that I'm not. That it's just that I've never actually been exposed to the humor of someone who actually didn't have any idea what they were talking about. That touched on my identity as an American. In fact, I didn't know what my identity as an American was, and it took seeing not that in order to figure out what that was. So as soon as I figured out what my identity was, I did get sensitive, and I realized, and I don't know whether I put this into practice properly, but I did realize that it's easy from the perspective of the joke teller or the seller to say, well, only really sensitive people are going to react to this, if that person has never encountered the thing, right? And I thought that I had encountered it and that I was immune to it, and it turns out it wasn't. So. People generally think that Americans are really stupid and that they work out a lot. Or conversely, that they never have gone outside and are enormously fat. Every high school stereotype apparently applies to every region of the United States, and there are no real regions to the United States in the minds of many of these kids. Like it's just, so what's the United States like? And then if you say, well, there are 50 states of the United States, and my state is a little bit different from Texas, which is a little bit different from Florida, that's like, it's not a surprise, but it's not something that's present in their minds. Is that enough?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like they come from a different perspective from almost everybody. That I guess a lot of times people talk about the American melting pot, like I want to talk about representation. I'm part white, part European, but I'm also part Indian and part Mexican. And even within that, I have a small amount of Cherokee blood, and I'm not Protestant, but I'm still Christian. And so I feel within these battles over sensitivity, I take the position of sort of neutral and amused. Because to me, I mean, I feel that a lot of times it gets sort of silly. On one hand, Wills presents a lot of valid concerns. When you start saying people from certain areas are stupid or fat and have like these undesirable, almost universally recognized characteristics as undesirable, that obviously goes too far. So I don't want anybody to say to me that I'm from Texas or I'm stupid or something like that. And so, or I don't know, something to that extent. On the other hand, I feel that as far as commodification is concerned, a lot of times, Sheldon brought up Highland Park. My school sort of like, a lot of times since there's like the academic rival of Highland Park, and so we have a lot of similarity, except we're a lot more diverse. But we find the whole Texas thing rather amusing, and we don't really get bothered by it. And it's almost, it makes us smile whenever we see like a really bad imitation of a cowboy hat or a saddle or whatever. It's just something that lightens up our day. And it's not something, within the various circles of ethnic groups in our school, it's, I guess we're really, those types of things, the commodifications don't really bother us, and we just sort of laugh at it. And so maybe I just come from this experience isn't shared by other people, but it almost, I feel like a lot of times the sensitivity goes too far, and that it's really great if you can create an environment where people are just, tolerant and, realize that, sometimes things are silly, but that's just what they are.
Michael, I guess just, sorry, a really quick personal response, but I feel like I would have to say in response to everything that kind of Jamie was point, because I feel like there's a lot of things, just personal for me, there's a lot of things about being Chinese that somebody can joke about and I'll be like, yeah, it's fine. There's a certain, and to a certain extent, I don't think you should take offense personally. I don't think you should take offense at ignorance to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But when somebody walks up to me, like for example, a couple at church walks up to me and says that they're going to China for vacation in the summer and asks me whether they should stock up on shampoo before they go, that does get.
And yeah, that's obviously going way too far. And so I'm just more concerned about, I guess, the commodification thing. That's what I'm talking about.
I think Bill.
Sort of looking at what Michael said, you talk about how you're not offended by Texas stereotypes and whatnot. Right. I think one thing we have to consider is the fact why certain people should be allowed to be more sensitive about things and when it's acceptable, because they've been systematically discriminated against throughout history. So I think that's something that you're failing to consider with that analogy, and so I don't think you can make that comparison and make it fair. But I think it's loaded in a weird way.
Can I? Yeah, because I obviously, a lot of my ethnicities have been discriminated against, whether it's, the anti-Catholic nativist movement or, anti-Mexican movements. And so I'm really aware of that. I guess the Texas thing just, can't really relate to that. But, as far as any of those are concerned, even the backgrounds that have been discriminated against are things that you cannot touch, and you cannot say that these ethnicities are, or groups, or we don't like them because of X, Y, and Z. But if you can modify some sort of article of clothing, I guess to me it's just more innocuous. And I realize I'm presenting a minority opinion, but I just wanted to share that perspective.
Okay. So I think that within every, first of all, this is just a personal opinion, but I don't feel like that culture itself, the very core identity of what Joe was talking about, should even be commodified in the first place. But anyways, in relation to that, I feel like what Joe brought up is really important, that to some degree, every culture has a specific part that is universal. Just as an example, for example, there's certain Asian clothing patterns that I would not mind seeing on I don't know, an Urban Outfitters store. or like there's certain like styles of clothing, like the very traditional gown, which I wouldn't mind having it like homogenized into like a Western thing, because I think that's really cool. And I don't think people would be offended by that. But then like, as Joe said, like the closer you go in, like there's some parts of culture that is just not universal. And so things that I personally, how I define it, is that like, if I don't expect a person of a different culture to automatically get, then I would also not expect you to, that would be what I consider off limits. So like when I was watching the Rihanna video, and then she was flying around with a sword, and like that white thing she was wearing that was inappropriately like revealing certain parts of her body, like the whole time I was just thinking like that just destroyed my childhood. Because a lot of a lot of the soap operas I watched when I was little, they would dress like that, except they didn't look like she was like, a slasher or something. That just like it like ruined a little part of me, and like a little part of me was dying inside. Just like you just can't do that. And so I feel like the universal parts are like where we can connect and those things can be exchanged, and I feel like that's crucial to the kind of globalized world that we do have today. And I feel like that should be okay. But when I feel like you wouldn't automatically get, that's just kind of off limits, and you shouldn't make jokes like that. Anyway, in response to Julian, I feel like the whole essence of being a capitalist like society is so that we are mostly reactionary, because you're supposed to leave the choice up to the people and like let them make the decision as to what or what not is in store. And so I feel like by nature it is kind of reactionary because there isn't so much legislation, but it does pay off though. So if you do make like underwear out of like Native American stuff, like, there will be like lawsuits that rifle up against that, and as long as we allow like these lawsuits to take place, I feel like that's okay. Because I don't know, I feel like it would be near impossible for you to legislate what is like off limits for each culture, because that is like strictly personal to that culture. I feel like it's better to just let whoever is insulted, like fight back against that and have those taken on.